Have you ever found yourself reading the same page of a textbook multiple times, highlighting key points, and still struggling to remember anything when the exam comes? Many students rely on passive study methods, such as rereading notes, highlighting text, or simply looking over lecture slides, thinking that these strategies will help them retain information. However, research has shown that these methods are among the least effective ways to learn. The reason? They create the illusion of knowledge without actually strengthening memory or understanding. The problem with passive studying is that it doesn't challenge the brain to retrieve information. When you simply read or highlight a passage, you might feel like you're learning, but your brain isn't actively working to recall the material. This is why, when faced with a test, many students experience a mental block, unable to retrieve information they thought they had mastered. True learning happens when you force your brain to pull information from memory, which is exactly what active recall is designed to do. Active recall, also known as retrieval practice, is a highly effective study technique that involves actively testing yourself on the material instead of passively reviewing it. Instead of just reading a chapter, you close the book and try to recall key ideas. Instead of rereading lecture notes, you ask yourself questions and try to answer them from memory. This method requires your brain to work harder, reinforcing neural connections and improving long-term retention. Studies have proven that active recall significantly outperforms passive study techniques. Research conducted at Washington University in St. Louis found that students who actively recalled information performed 50% better on memory tests compared to those who simply reread their notes. Another study published in Science magazine showed that students who self-tested retained twice as much information compared to those who used traditional review techniques. What is active recall? Active recall is a learning technique that involves actively retrieving information from memory rather than passively reviewing it. Unlike traditional study methods such as rereading textbooks, highlighting notes, or watching lectures repeatedly, active recall forces your brain to engage deeply with the material by recalling facts, concepts, and ideas without directly looking at the source. This process strengthens neural connections, making it easier to remember information for a longer period. The fundamental principle behind active recall is simple. If you want to remember something, you need to practice recalling it. Instead of just exposing yourself to information over and over again, you actively challenge your brain to retrieve that information without any external aid. This technique has been widely studied in cognitive science and has been shown to be one of the most effective ways to improve memory retention and academic performance. The key difference between active recall and passive studying is that you're actively retrieving information rather than just recognizing it. When you reread a paragraph or look at a highlighted sentence, you might feel like you know the material, but in reality, your brain is just recognizing familiar words. This is why many students feel confident while studying but struggle when they actually have to recall the information in an exam. Scientific research supports the effectiveness of active recall. A study conducted by Roediger and Karpik, 2006, found that students who tested themselves on material retained nearly 80% of the information after 1 week, while those who simply reread the material only retained about 34%. This highlights how self-testing and recall-based learning can significantly boost long-term memory retention. Why is active recall more effective than traditional study methods? Many students rely on passive study techniques, such as rereading textbooks, highlighting key points, or watching lecture videos multiple times, thinking that repetition alone will help them retain information. However, research has consistently shown that these methods create a false sense of mastery. Students feel like they understand the material simply because they recognize it, but when it comes time to recall the information in an exam, they struggle. This is where active recall stands out as a superior learning strategy. The main reason active recall is more effective than passive learning is that it forces the brain to actively retrieve information, strengthening neural connections in the process. When you challenge yourself to recall something without looking at your notes or textbook, you train your brain to access stored knowledge in the same way you would during a test. This process helps move information from short-term memory to long-term memory, making it much easier to recall when needed. Scientific studies have proven the effectiveness of active recall over traditional study methods. In a study conducted by Roediger and Karpik, 2006, students were divided into 2 groups. One group reread material multiple times, while the other group actively recalled the information by testing themselves. After 1 week, the group that practiced active recall remembered nearly twice as much information compared to the group that only reread. This study demonstrates that self-testing and retrieval practice significantly enhance retention compared to passive review. Another reason active recall is so effective is that it identifies knowledge gaps early on. When you reread a chapter or highlight key points, it's easy to believe that you understand everything. However, when you attempt to recall key concepts without looking at your notes, you quickly realize which areas you truly understand and which areas need more review. This prevents the common mistake of overestimating knowledge and ensures that you focus your study time on weak points rather than just reinforcing what you already know. How to apply active recall in your study routine. Now that you understand why active recall is more effective than passive study techniques, the next step is learning how to apply it to your daily study routine. Many students struggle with inefficient study habits because they don't have a structured approach to practicing recall. Below are some of the best ways to incorporate active recall into your learning process to improve memory retention and study efficiency. 1. Ask yourself questions instead of rereading. One of the easiest ways to start using active recall is to turn your study material into a series of questions. Instead of passively reading through a textbook or your notes, challenge yourself by asking, what are the key concepts from this chapter? How would I explain this topic to someone else? What are the causes and effects of this event/process? By forcing yourself to recall information before checking your notes, you actively engage your brain, making the learning process much more effective. For example, if you're studying the nervous system in biology, don't just reread the textbook. Instead, write down key questions like, what are the main functions of the nervous system? How does a neuron transmit signals? What are the differences between the central and peripheral nervous systems? Once you have your questions, try to answer them without looking at your notes. If you struggle, review the material and test yourself again later. 2. Use flashcards to self-test. Flashcards are one of the most powerful tools for active recall because they require you to retrieve information from memory instead of just recognizing it. The key to using flashcards effectively is to write a question on one side and the answer on the other. Try to answer from memory before flipping the card over. If you get it wrong, don't immediately move on. Instead, try again later to reinforce your recall. Use spaced repetition, reviewing cards over increasing time intervals, to strengthen long-term retention. Apps like Anki, Quizlet, and Brainscape are great for digital flashcards, as they allow you to track your progress and prioritize difficult cards. 3. Explain concepts in your own words, Feynman technique. A great way to practice active recall is by using the Feynman technique, which involves choosing a concept you want to learn, explaining it as if you were teaching a child, using simple language, identifying areas where you struggle and revisiting those parts, refining your explanation until you can teach the topic fluently. This technique forces your brain to reorganize information in a way that makes sense, helping you identify weak points and improve comprehension. For example, if you're studying Newton's laws of motion, instead of memorizing the definitions, try explaining them like this. Newton's first law says that if something is moving, it keeps moving unless something stops it. It's like when you slide a book on a table, it only stops because of friction. This forces you to actively think about the concept instead of just memorizing words. 4. Use practice tests and mock exams. Practice tests are one of the most effective ways to incorporate active recall because they simulate real exam conditions. Instead of passively reviewing your notes, take a full-length practice test or try solving past exam questions without looking at any materials. If you get an answer wrong, don't just read the correct answer, try to recall the concept again later. The act of struggling to remember before checking the solution helps reinforce learning. A good approach is to take a timed practice test at the start of your study session. Review only the questions you got wrong and test yourself again later. Keep track of which areas you struggle with and prioritize them in future study sessions. Common mistakes when using active recall and how to avoid them. While active recall is one of the most effective study techniques, many students unknowingly use it incorrectly, which reduces its effectiveness. Below are some common mistakes and how to fix them. 1. Only reviewing notes instead of actively testing yourself. Many students think they are using active recall when they reread notes and try to remember key points, but true active recall requires retrieving information without looking at any materials. Solution: close your book, hide your notes, and try to recall key concepts before checking for accuracy. If you can't remember, it's a sign that you need more practice. 2. Checking answers too quickly. Some students give up too soon and look at the answers immediately. This prevents the brain from struggling to retrieve information, which is key to strengthening memory. Solution: before checking your notes, spend at least 30 seconds actively trying to recall the answer. Even if you don't get it exactly right, the effort itself improves retention. 3. Not using spaced repetition. Repeating active recall too soon, e.g., on the same day, might feel helpful, but it doesn't strengthen long-term memory. Solution: space out your recall sessions. Review material after a few days, then a week, then 2 weeks. Tools like Anki and Quizlet automate this process. 4. Not practicing with exam-style questions. Many students focus on memorizing facts, but fail to practice applying the information. In exams, recall is not just about remembering, it's about understanding and using knowledge in different contexts. Solution: take practice tests, answer past exam questions, or create mock tests for yourself. This prepares your brain for real exam conditions. 5. Overloading study sessions without breaks. Trying to recall too much information in one session leads to mental fatigue and reduces efficiency. Solution: use the Pomodoro technique, e.g., 25-minute active recall sessions with 5-minute breaks. This helps maintain focus and prevents burnout. By avoiding these mistakes and using active recall correctly, you'll maximize your learning efficiency, retain information longer, and perform better in exams. Active recall is one of the most powerful study techniques, helping you learn faster, retain information longer, and study more effectively. Unlike passive methods like rereading and highlighting, active recall forces your brain to actively retrieve information, strengthening memory and improving long-term retention. This method has been scientifically proven to be far superior to traditional study techniques and can be easily incorporated into your daily routine through self-testing, flashcards, teaching concepts aloud, and combining it with spaced repetition. If you're tired of ineffective study habits, try active recall today and experience the difference. Have you used this technique before? Share your experience in the comments. If you found this video helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications for more study tips. See you in the next video.